Hello, Algebra 1. This video is our video key for assignment 8.1, in which we had 10 questions solving quadratic equations using the square root method. So use this to check your homework, see how you did. If you still have any questions after this video, please email me and we'll work through whatever you might be stuck on together. Let's get started with number 1. Number 1 is 16b squared plus 1 equals 101. And remember from the lesson, what we want to do is we want to get the squared component by itself on the left side and then a number on the right side. So we want it to be squared component equals a number. Well, what is our squared component over here on the left side? Here's where we're squaring it. Is it 16b or just b? It would be 16b squared if that 16b were in parentheses. Then this would be our squared component. This exponent only goes with directly what's to its left. So here it goes, it belongs just to the b. Here it belongs to the parentheses. Goes to the parentheses, goes to the b. So our squared component is actually just b squared. So we're going to want to get b squared by itself on the left side and the number on the right. We're going to start by subtracting 1 from each side. I'll get 16b squared, my 1's cancel out, equals 101 minus 1 is 100. Get the b squared by itself. I'm going to divide each side by 16. I will get b squared equals 6.25. Now I'm solving for b. So what do I want to do? I want to take the square root of each side. And when I do that, if I take the square root of something squared, I just get whatever it was originally here. So the square root sign and the square, they cancel each other out. I'll be left with just b. If I take the square root of the left side, I have to take the square root of the right side. So the square root of 6.25 is 2.5. However, let's keep this in mind. When you take the square root of a number, there's a positive and a negative. Okay, positive 2.5 times positive 2.5, that equals 6.25. At the same time, negative 2.5 times negative 2.5, that also equals positive 6.25, because two negatives make a positive. So number 1, our answer is plus or minus 2.5. Number 2 is a squared plus 9 equals 34. Again, we want to get the squared component on one side, number on the other. So we're going to get squared component equals a number. That means we need to move this 9 over. Subtract 9 from each side. I will get a squared equals 25. I'm trying to solve for my variable a here. So if I have a squared, I want to get just to a. I take the square root. If I take the square root of a squared, that's going to give me a. I want to take the square root of 25. Well, we know the square root of 25 is 5, but remember there's a plus or minus, because positive 5 times positive 5 equals 25, but negative 5 times negative 5 also equals 25. So our answer for number 2 is a equals plus or minus 5. Number 3, we have p squared plus 8 equals 44. Again, our goal is to get squared component equals a number. What's our squared component in this equation? It's the p squared. So we want to get p squared by itself on the left side. We're going to subtract 8 from each side. We'll end up with p squared equals 36. We are solving for the variable p, so we're going to take the square root of each side, because the square root of p squared equals just p. And the square root of 36 is 6, but remember, it is plus or minus 6. So our answer for number 3 is p equals plus or minus 6. Number 4, we have 5n squared minus 4 equals 16. Again, we want to get this in, because we're using the square root method, which means we want to get squared component equals a number. What is our squared component? It's n squared. The exponent belongs to the thing that's just to the left. So n squared is what we're looking to get by itself. So I'm going to start by adding 4 to both sides. So my 4's cancel out on the left side. I get 5n squared equals 20. I'm going to divide by 5 next, so I can get just the n squared over there. I get n squared equals 4. Now remember, I'm solving for the variable n. I'm going to want to take the square root. So the square root of n squared, the square and the square root cancel each other out. So the square root of n squared is just n, and square root of 4 is 2, but remember, it's plus or minus 2. So our answer for number 4 is n equals plus or minus 2. And number 5, we have 9b squared plus 3 equals 327. Looking for squared component equals a number. My squared component is going to be b squared. So to get b squared by itself, I'm going to start by subtracting 3 from each side. I'll end up with 9b squared equals 324. I divide each side by 9 so I can get that b squared alone on the left side. The 9's cancel out. I get b squared equals 324 divided by 9 is 36. Remember, I'm solving for the variable, so I'm solving for b. Square root of b squared is going to be b. If I take the square root of the left side, I take the square root of the right side. Square root of 36 is 6, but remember it's plus or minus. So our answer to number 5 is b equals plus or minus 6. Number 6 is we have a plus 1 in parentheses. We're squaring that equals 16. Now remember, using the square root method, we want squared component equals a number. But what is our squared component here? Well, the exponent belongs to directly what's on its left. And what's directly to the left of the exponent? The parentheses. So this is our squared component, this whole thing. So it's set up the way we want it right now. So we have a plus 1 squared equals 16. So if I'm solving just for this squared component here, I'm going to take the square root now. And I know that taking the square root of a square, those cancel out, and I'm going to be left with just a plus 1 on the left side. Now on the right side, the square root of 16 is 4. But remember, when we're taking the square root of a number, it's plus or minus. So now we have this weird looking equation, a plus 1 equals plus or minus 4. What do I do with that? I'm going to split it into 2 separate equations, one using the plus 4 and one using the minus 4. So I'm going to have a plus 1 equals 4. And on this second equation, I'm going to have a plus 1 equals negative 4. Now I'm going to solve each one of these equations for a. So on this one, I'm going to subtract 1 from each side. I'll get a equals 3. And over here, when I subtract 1 from each side, I'll get a equals negative 5. So my answer is a equals 3 or a equals negative 5. Okay, number 7, 6 times, parentheses, n minus 2 squared equals 486. And I'm using the square root method, so I want to get squared component equals a number. I have to identify first, what is my squared component? Is it n minus 2 squared, or is it 6 times n minus 2 squared? Remember, the exponent belongs only to what's directly to its left. So what's directly to its left? The parentheses. So our squared component is this parentheses n minus 2 squared. The 6 is not part of that squared component. So we need to get rid of it. So we are going to divide each side by 6, and the 6's cancel out over here. We have n minus 2 squared equals 486 divided by 6 is 81. Okay, now I want to, if I have a squared component here, I'm going to take the square root of that, knowing that the square root of n minus 2 squared is just going to be n minus 2. That square root and the square cancel out. And I'm going to take the square root of 81, which is 9, but don't forget, when we're square rooting a number, we have plus or minus. So I need to divide that into 2 separate equations. N minus 2 equals positive 9, and n minus 2 equals negative 9. We'll solve each one of these equations for n, adding 2 to both sides over here. I'll get n equals 11. And when I add 2 to each side over here, I'll get n equals negative 7. So my answer to this question is n equals 11 and n equals negative 7. Number 8, we have n plus 6 in parentheses squared minus 8 equals negative 4. Using the square root method, we have to identify what's that squared component we want by itself on the left side. That's the first thing we do. And it's n plus 6 in parentheses squared. That's our squared component. We need to get it by itself. So we're going to start by adding 8 to each side. I'll get n plus 6 squared on the left equals 4. Now we need to take the square root of each side. And that way, my left side, the square root and the square cancel out, and I'm left with just n plus 6. Square root of 4 is 2, but don't forget we're taking the square root of a number. It's plus or minus, because positive 2 times positive 2 equals 4, but negative 2 times negative 2 also equals 4. Now I want to get n by itself, so I'm going to subtract 6 from each side. Well, I jumped the gun there. What am I going to do with this plus or minus? Well, I'm going to divide this whole, or split this whole thing into two equations. So I'll get n plus 6 equals the positive 2, and n plus 6 equals the negative 2. Now I'm going to solve each one of these equations for n. So now I'll subtract 6 from each side. Cancel over here, I get n equals a negative 4. When I subtract 6 from each side over here, I get n equals a negative 8. So there is my answer for number 8. N equals negative 4, or n equals negative 8. Here's number 9. We got a lot going on here. 81 times k minus 10 in parentheses squared plus 5 equals 86. First thing we do on a square root problem, regardless of how messy it is we identify what's that squared component we're going to try to isolate on the left side. And it's going to be whatever's directly left of that exponent of 2. In this case, it's the parentheses. So we're going to try to get k minus 10 in parentheses squared alone by itself on the left side. So to do that, we're going to start by subtracting 5 from each side. We'll get 81 times k minus 10 squared. My 5's cancel out over here, equals 81. Now to get the squared component by itself, I'm going to divide each side by 81. So my 81's cancel out on the left. I'll get k minus 10 squared equals, well, 81 divided by 81 is just 1. So now that I have my squared component over here, I want to take the square root of it, because the square root and the square will cancel out, and I'll be left with just k minus 10 on the left side. But I also need to take the square root on the right side. So the square root of 1 is 1, but don't forget, when we're taking the square root of a number, it's plus or minus. So we have k minus 10 equals plus or minus 1. We'll split that into two equations where we have k minus 10 equals the positive 1, and this equation over here is k minus 10 equals the negative 1. So solving each one for k, add 10 to each side. Over here I get k equals 11. Add 10 over here, I get k equals 9. So my answer to number 9 is k equals 11 or k equals 9. Here is our final question on this assignment, number 10. We have 2 times k minus 5 in parentheses squared plus 7 equals 207. So first thing we got to do is identify what's the squared component. Remember, we're looking for that exponent 2, whatever is directly to the left of it, that's the parentheses. So we're going to try to get k minus 5 in parentheses squared alone by itself on the left side. And then we'll have squared component equals a number. Well, we're going to start by subtracting 7 from each side. So I'll get 2 times k minus 5 squared equals 200. Next thing I'm going to do to get this squared component by itself is divide each side by 2 because my 2's cancel out. And I will get k minus 5 squared equals 100. Now that I have my squared component over here by itself, I want to take the square root of it. Because the square root and the square will cancel out, I'll be left with just k minus 5 on the left side. But if I square root the left side, I have to square root the right side. Square root of 100 is 10. Don't forget when we're taking the square root of a number, it is plus or minus. So we now split that into two equations. K minus 5 equals the positive 10. K minus 5 equals the negative 10. To solve for k, I'm going to add 5 to each side. I'll get k equals 15. When I add 5 over here, I get k equals, ran out of room there, negative 5. I hope you can read that. The answer to number 10 is k equals 15 or k equals negative 5. Hopefully going through all these questions one at a time helps you understand the process a little more. If you have a question or if you're still stuck on one of the problems, please email me so we can work through that.